I never expected my dream home to come with a pair of eyes behind the curtain. Not the romantic kind, not even the curious kind, but the calculating stare of a woman who saw herself as the gatekeeper of everything that moved, breathed, or dared to change on her block. My name is Terrell Marcus, and for 15 years, I played the long game. From entry-level coder to CTO of Horizon Technologies, I scaled every rung with purpose. Every stock option, every unpaid weekend, every frozen dinner. This house was the reward. 4 bedrooms. Mature oaks. A street where joggers actually waved, and the air smelled like money and mulch. It was mine now. All of it. The move-in was smooth. My girlfriend Amara and I spent weekends making it ours. She banished my bachelor couch with a single raised eyebrow, and we laughed over her mission to civilize the place. Even the neighbors chipped in, the Patels with warm samosas, the Hendersons with unsolicited garden tips. But then, there was the house across the street. 47 Sycamore Lane. The hedges were surgically trimmed. The mailbox polished. And behind the living room window, her. Karen. Hair dyed like clockwork, lips always pursed, dressed like she was headed to a golf club even when checking for coupons. She didn't smile. She didn't wave. She just watched. At first, I brushed it off. Every neighborhood has its quirks, right? A nosy neighbor. A curtain twitcher. A lonely soul in a big house. Until Mrs. Henderson warned me with a chuckle wrapped in concern, Karen's been here 20 years. Lost her husband and gained a hobby, watching newcomers like hawks. She thinks keeping out the wrong element protects the property value. The phrase sat with me. Protecting property value. The way she said it. The pause before newcomers. I'd heard it before. Not in those words, but in every sideways glance and tight smile that followed me in boardrooms, airports, and now, evidently, my own cul-de-sac. Still, I didn't have the luxury of letting suspicion fester. The house needed work. My team at Horizon was launching a new product. My parents were planning a visit. Life was full. But so was Karen's gaze. Silent. Constant. I didn't know it yet, but that stare would soon evolve into something darker. More invasive. More illegal. And before the month was out, I'd be standing on her porch, demanding the return of something that was never hers. And watching as she dialed 911 with trembling fingers and venom in her voice. But for now, I sipped coffee on my porch each morning, trying to believe I was finally home, while across the street, behind a lace curtain, Karen was already writing a very different story. It began with an envelope, and ended with suspicion that refused to sleep. When you're new to a neighborhood, the last thing you want is trouble. So I ignored the little things. The 3 days of no mail. The credit card offers that never came. The eerie silence from a mailbox that should have been bursting with welcome spam. I blamed it on bureaucracy. Mistakes. Oversight. Anything but a neighbor. Then I saw her. It was a Thursday, warm enough to take out the garbage in a t-shirt. I was halfway across my lawn when movement on Karen's porch caught my eye. She stood there, flipping through envelopes like she was checking stock reports, slow, precise, deliberate. My eyes narrowed. It wasn't just the mail in her hands. It was the way she glanced up, twice, toward my house. It was the folder she slipped the envelopes into. It was the way she hurried inside like a teenager hiding contraband. A pit formed in my stomach. But I didn't want to believe it. Karen, the self-anointed HOA gatekeeper, the woman who dressed like Sunday morning even on Wednesday afternoons, surely she wouldn't do something so criminal? And yet, that night, as I sat on the couch with Amara watching Netflix, my thoughts were elsewhere. She noticed. You've paused this scene 4 times. What's going on? I told her. Everything. The missing mail. The odd sighting. She didn't laugh it off. She didn't gaslight me. Work from home tomorrow, she said instead. Sit by the window. Watch. So I did. The next day, I set up my laptop on the dining table, prime view of the mailbox. It felt ridiculous. Like I was staging a stakeout in a gated suburb. But at 2:15 p.m., the mail carrier arrived, slipped a bundle into my box, and walked on. 10 minutes passed. Then Karen emerged. Hair perfect. Eyes darting. She walked briskly to my mailbox, looked left and right like a cartoon thief, then slid open the box and stole everything. She didn't even hesitate. My hands froze over the keyboard. My breath caught. She turned and scurried back to her house, envelopes clutched in her hands like secrets. I stood slowly, closed my laptop, and exhaled. Then I walked out the door. 47 Sycamore Lane loomed like a smug statue. Every step I took across the yard felt heavier. My heart pounded, not from fear, but fury. I'd given her the benefit of the doubt. I'd ignored the stares. The silence. The subtle hostility. No more. I rang her doorbell. She took her time. When the door cracked open, she appeared in a sliver of light, face tight and expressionless. Yes, she said, voice cool and clipped. Good afternoon, Karen. I'm Terrell Marcus from across the street. She didn't move. Didn't reach for my hand. Just stared. I think you were just at my mailbox, I said, calm but firm. Maybe there was confusion with the delivery? Her face twitched. I don't know what you're talking about. I've been inside all afternoon. A lie. A bold one. Karen, I saw you. I was at my window. You took the mail from my box. Her mouth pinched. Are you accusing me of theft? I kept my voice steady. I'm asking you to return my property. She crossed her arms. I have nothing of yours. You're harassing me. If you don't leave, I'll call the police. I took a slow breath. Please do. I'll wait right here. And that's exactly what happened. She slammed the door. I stayed on her porch. 5 minutes later, she stepped out again. Phone in hand, voice dramatic. Yes, officer. He's still here. He's intimidating. He's making threats. She clutched the phone, unaware I could see the edge of my bank statement sticking out from behind it. Karen, I said calmly, that envelope you're holding has my name and bank on it. I recognize it. She gasped, then shoved it into her cardigan pocket. He's making things up now, she nearly shouted into the phone. I pulled out my own phone and hit record. Her eyes widened. You can't do that. It's illegal. We're on your front porch, I replied. Perfectly legal to document evidence of a crime. Her jaw clenched. The police are on their way. Let's see who they believe. She disappeared inside again. I waited. The flashing lights arrived without a siren. For that, I was grateful. I didn't need the whole street lit up like a crime scene. Though I guess, technically, that's what it had become. 2 patrol cars pulled up. One with a younger Latina officer and one with a burly white man whose resting face screamed suspicion. I didn't flinch, didn't move. I kept my hands folded across my chest, palms open, like every black man learns to do when the system is watching. Mrs. Henderson stood frozen across the street, her gardening gloves still on, brows knit with worry. The officers stepped out slowly. The male one rested his fingers near his holster, not quite on it, but close enough to make me swallow. "Good afternoon," he said. "I'm Officer Daniels. We received a call about a disturbance?" I nodded. "Yes, sir. I'm Terrell Marcus. I live right over there at 45 Sycamore. I came to speak with my neighbor, Karen, because I saw her take mail from my mailbox, mail that still hasn't been returned." Officer Rivera, the female officer, scribbled in a notebook. "And where is she now?" "She went inside after she called you. Told the dispatcher she felt threatened, though I haven't raised my voice, let alone made any threats. I just asked for my mail back." As if summoned by cue, the front door creaked open behind me. Karen emerged, now the picture of trembling vulnerability. "Thank goodness you're here," she cried, clutching her cardigan. "He came onto my porch, refused to leave, accused me of stealing me. I feel unsafe." Officer Rivera raised a brow. "Did he threaten you directly?" "Well, not in so many words, but his presence is intimidating. I'm alone. I'm 63. I didn't say a word. Just waited. Then she made the mistake." Her hand pressed against the cardigan pocket, the same one where I'd seen my mail tucked just moments earlier. The motion didn't go unnoticed. "Karen," Officer Daniels said gently, "Mr. Marcus claims you took mail from his box today. Did you?" "I monitor the neighborhood," she said, lifting her chin. "As part of the HOA, it's my job to know what kind of activity is happening here. We've had trouble before." "And does that activity include taking other people's mail?" Officer Rivera asked. "No. I was just, ma'am, do you have any of Mr. Marcus' mail on you right now?" Rivera pressed. Her hand twitched again toward her pocket. "No," I pulled out my phone. I recorded the earlier conversation, when she had it visible in her hand. The envelope had my bank's logo. Officer Daniels looked at Rivera, then back to Karen. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see what's in your pocket." "This is outrageous," she snapped. "He's harassing me." "Ma'am," Daniels said, more stern now, "please." With shaking hands, she reached into the cardigan pocket. One envelope. Then two. Then three. A bank statement, a mortgage document, and a letter from my mother, in her distinct Chicago cursive. Each one opened. Rivera's jaw clenched. "Karen, tampering with mail is a federal offense. I was going to return them." "After opening them?" Daniels pointed to the torn seal. "Why?" She had no answer. And then a voice pierced the tension from across the lawn. "She did it to us too," Mrs. Henderson called out. She stepped closer, hands trembling, yet firm in her voice. "When the Thompsons moved in last year, same thing. And the Guptas. But no one could prove it." Another voice chimed in, Mr. Patel, emerging from his driveway. "Same here. She said she was picking up a flyer from our yard. But we never got half our wedding mail." Then another neighbor. Then another. The circle around Karen was forming. Karen spun, wild-eyed. "This is a setup. I was protecting the neighborhood. There are standards, property values, you mean race?" Amara's voice sliced through the scene like a scalpel. She'd just arrived, her navy slacks and calm precision declaring her presence before she spoke another word. She stood beside me, eyes locked on Karen. "I'm Amara Johnson. Civil rights attorney. Mr. Marcus attorney." Daniels and Rivera exchanged glances. Rivera took the phone, watched the video, then nodded. "Karen," Daniels said, "we'll need to take you in for further questioning. We'll also be notifying the U.S. Postal Inspection Service. You can't arrest me. I'm on the HOA board." "Not anymore," Mrs. Henderson muttered. Karen lunged forward suddenly, ripping one of the envelopes in half and flinging it toward me. "Take your damn check. It's probably no good anyway. You people are all the same." Gasps echoed from all sides. Daniels didn't flinch. "Add destruction of male and racial bias to the incident report." He pulled out the cuffs. As she was led away, her face a mask of shock and indignation, I stood frozen. Not triumphant. Not angry. Just tired. Exhausted from a reality that too many wanted to pretend didn't exist. Karen had tried to make me a criminal. And now, the real one was in handcuffs. Aftermath. The next 48 hours were a blur of statements, interviews, and official visits. Gloria Ramirez, the postal inspector assigned to the case, arrived like a storm in heels. "We executed a warrant," she said, flipping open a file. "You won't believe what we found." She laid out the photos. 4 boxes of mail. Meticulously organized. Color-coded. Logged by address, date, even ethnicity. She kept spreadsheets, Ramirez added. Judgments about people's income, their spending habits. She especially monitored households that weren't white. Or not heteronormative. One couple with a rainbow flag? She had 3 folders on them. I sat back, stunned. She had one on you too. The next week, our neighborhood met under the community gazebo. No agenda. No formalities. Just people showing up. Mrs. Patel stood at the center. "We let this happen," she said quietly. "We looked the other way because it wasn't happening to us. That ends now." Everyone nodded. They weren't just agreeing. They were waking up. Trial months later, in a solemn federal courtroom, Karen stood before Judge Hargrove, an older black man with sharp glasses and no tolerance for nonsense. Karen's defense was weak. She pled guilty, hoping to avoid harsher sentencing. But the judge wasn't moved. "Mail theft is not petty," he said. "It's invasive. Systematic. And in this case, driven by bias. You weren't protecting property values. You were gatekeeping an illusion." He sentenced her to 15 months in federal prison, $10,000 in restitution, and a 10-year ban from serving on any HOA. She collapsed in her chair. Justice, however flawed, had spoken. Closure. When the dust settled, our mailbox became sacred. I retrieved each letter like it mattered, because now, it did. My neighbors changed. Some slowly, some overnight. But they changed. One warm summer evening, we hosted a barbecue. The Patels brought samosas. The Gonzaleses brought ribs. The Hendersons brought their stories. We toasted, not to revenge, not to Karen's downfall, but to a new beginning. To Terrell, Mrs. Henderson said. Who stood when the rest of us whispered. Who reminded us that silence helps no one. The glasses clinked. I smiled. Not because I won, but because I stayed. 3 months later, the federal courthouse in downtown Richmond loomed before us, massive and cold, as if carved from the stone of every judgment ever passed within it. It was sentencing day. Amara and I walked up the wide granite steps in silence. She looked formidable, braids pulled back, charcoal gray suit pressed to perfection. Me? I wore the same navy suit I'd been photographed in last year when I was named one of Virginia's top 40 under 40 in tech leadership. Today, though, the title meant nothing. Today, I was just another victim of a crime too familiar to too many. Inside, we were escorted to Courtroom 3, where the case of United States vs. Karen Harrington would be heard. Waiting for us was U.S. Attorney Caroline Winters, a tall, silver-haired woman with a steel gaze. Thank you for being here, she said briskly. Karen has pled guilty to 18 counts of federal mail theft. But the judge has requested victim impact statements before final sentencing. I nodded. She's here? Yes. With her attorney. She's out on bail, but not for long. And the hate crime enhancement? Amara asked, her tone calm but firm. We're still pursuing it, Winters said. The evidence from her house, her notes, the racial and cultural targeting, is compelling. And her own words during the arrest? They only made it worse. The courtroom by 9 a.m., the benches had begun to fill. The Hendersons, the Patels, and even the Guptas were here. Each of them had once been targeted by Karen's scrutiny. Now, they came to watch her face what she'd long evaded, accountability. At 9:15, the bailiff called the room to order. All rise, he said as Judge William Hargrove entered. The judge, a dignified black man in his 60s, adjusted his glasses and took his seat. Case number 24, CR 7291. United States vs. Karen Harrington. Karen entered from the side door. She looked smaller than I remembered. Pale. Fragile. Diminished. She wore a muted blue dress, hair perfectly styled, eyes cast low. She didn't look at anyone. But I looked at her. Because I needed to. Because the only thing more dangerous than prejudice is pretending it never happened. My turn to speak, Mr. Marcus, the judge said, as the primary complainant in this case, you may approach. I stood. Each step toward the stand was a step back through every moment of invasion, suspicion, and the humiliating threat of being labeled the aggressor on my own porch. After swearing in, I began. Your Honor, I'm here today not just as a homeowner whose mail was stolen, but as someone whose dignity, peace, and belonging were tampered with far more deliberately than an envelope seal. When I moved to 45 Sycamore Lane, I thought I'd made it. A 4-bedroom house. A good job. A partner I love. It felt like the American dream had finally opened its doors to me. But that door was shadowed by Karen Harrington. And for weeks, she used those shadows, of prejudice, of false authority, to make sure I never forgot I was being watched. I paused. The courtroom was silent. She didn't just take bank statements. She tried to take something far more sacred, my right to peace. My right to feel at home. I nodded toward the evidence table. What she did was not random. It was methodical. Her own notes confirm that she kept files, records, and judgments on anyone she thought didn't belong. People like me. Like my neighbors. People with brown skin, foreign names, same-sex partners. She was trying to create her version of a safe neighborhood, and we were the danger in her eyes. Karen shifted in her seat. Her attorney placed a calming hand on her arm. I continued. I don't take joy in seeing anyone sentenced. But I do believe in justice. And I believe her actions deserve the fullest measure of it, not just because they violated law, but because they violated community. I stepped down. My hands trembled slightly, but my spine felt iron-forged. Other victims speak after me, Mrs. Patel stood. Her voice cracked as she recounted lost wedding invitations. Mr. Gonzalez described immigration documents that never arrived. Even Mrs. Henderson, a retired judge herself, gave a short but cutting statement. She didn't act out of concern. She acted out of control. And control, when fueled by bias, is tyranny in disguise. By the time they were done, the weight of Karen's crimes felt heavy in the air. Karen speaks. Judge Hargrove turned to her. Ms. Harrington, would you like to speak before sentencing? She rose slowly. Shaky. Hesitant. I didn't mean harm, she said. I only wanted to preserve our community. Property values matter. Standards matter. She looked around the courtroom, expecting nods. There were none. I thought I was doing the right thing. Maybe I went too far. Maybe? Judge Hargrove's voice cut in. Are you suggesting stealing private mail was part of your civic duty? Karen opened her mouth, then closed it. Her face was red. Her eyes darted. No further statement, her attorney said quickly. Sentencing. The judge took off his glasses. Mail theft is a federal offense, Ms. Harrington. But when committed with clear racial or cultural targeting, it becomes something worse, a tool of exclusion. A weapon of quiet hate. He glanced at the crowd. This neighborhood trusted you. You violated that trust. Systematically. Repeatedly. And for no other reason than your own prejudice. He stood. Ms. Harrington, having pled guilty to 18 counts of federal mail theft under Title 18, U.S. Code Section 1708, I hereby sentence you to 15 months in federal prison, followed by 2 years of supervised release. You will also pay $2,000 in restitution to each of your 5 named victims, totaling $10,000. Furthermore, you are barred from serving on any HOA board for 10 years post-release and are forbidden from contacting any of your victims. Karen gasped. Her attorney gripped her arm as she sat down hard. This court is adjourned. The gavel echoed. Karen was led away in silence. After the verdict outside the courthouse, under the brilliant September sky, Amara and I walked slowly. That felt like the end of something, I murmured. No, she corrected, squeezing my hand. That felt like the beginning of something better. A few feet away, Inspector Ramirez approached. Your testimony helped secure the sentencing, she said. But it also helped us launch a nationwide campaign. One that educates communities on how to document and report mail-based harassment. Your case. It's going into the handbook. My breath caught. You think it'll help others? It already is. She handed me a folder. Inside was a draft brochure, Protecting Your Mail, Know Your Rights, with anonymized quotes from our case. We'd like your permission to use this, she said. I nodded. Use all of it. The truth deserves daylight. That night, the air on Sycamore Lane felt different. Not just clearer, but freer. Dinner with Amara turned celebratory. Not for Karen's downfall, but for every neighbor who had stood up. For every voice that was no longer silent. And for the knowledge that sometimes, when you demand dignity, the world, slowly, painfully, starts to listen. The days that followed the sentencing of Karen Harrington felt, still. As if the neighborhood itself had taken a breath, unsure of what to exhale next. Life returned, in a way, to normal. Mail was delivered without interference, neighbors greeted each other a little more warmly, and the HOA, now free of Karen's iron grip, moved forward with reforms. But for me, the peace was interrupted by a thin white envelope that arrived 6 weeks after the trial. It was stamped with the return address of FCI Alderson, the federal correctional institution where Karen was serving her sentence. Amara and I stared at it on the kitchen counter. You going to open it? She asked. Eventually, I replied. I wasn't ready. Not that day. Not yet. Instead, I turned my focus to the garden out front, something that Amara had insisted I start months ago. If we're going to be suburban homeowners, she'd said with a grin, we might as well grow our own tomatoes. The garden became therapy. Dirt under fingernails. Rows of basil, cherry tomatoes, bell peppers. Quiet moments of cultivation. Peace rooted in soil. It was during one of these moments, kneeling to water the seedlings, that I saw a familiar car pull into the driveway. Inspector Gloria Ramirez. She stepped out in a crisp blazer despite the spring heat. I greeted her with a handshake and a raised brow. This a surprise visit? She smiled. A courtesy. I thought you should know, Karen was transferred to minimum security. Good behavior. She's finishing her sentence early, but under tight probation. And she won't be returning here. I nodded. Her sister lives in Tampa, right? Yes. She's been approved to serve probation there. Ramirez paused, then added, we've also launched the national campaign I mentioned. Your case is part of our first training module. We've had over 400 local post offices request it already. I felt my chest expand slightly. The weight of it all shifted, not vanished, but lighter somehow. She handed me a folder. Inside, materials branded with the USPS seal, a quote from my testimony, and practical advice for other victims. Thank you, I said. I'm glad it's helping. Before she left, Ramirez glanced at the garden. You know, she said, this is how change usually starts. Quietly. One seed at a time. That evening, I opened the letter. It was handwritten. The script was formal, deliberate, Karen's handwriting. Dear Mr. Marcus, I'm writing as part of my rehabilitation program. My counselor suggested taking accountability in writing. I have spent time reflecting, and though I'm not sure I agree with everything I've learned, I do recognize that what I did to you was wrong. It was not my place to judge. Not my place to intrude. I see now that my actions were not protective, they were rooted in fear, in assumptions. I won't return to Sycamore. My sister has offered me a place in Florida. You need not worry about me again. I wish you peace. Sincerely, Karen Harrington. I read it twice. Amara, seated beside me, didn't speak. She simply placed her hand on mine. I don't know what to think, I admitted. You don't have to think anything, she said. You don't owe her that. But I did respond. Ms. Harrington, thank you for your letter. I accept your words not as closure, but as acknowledgement. The harm you caused is real, and the consequences were deserved. I hope your time and reflection leads to lasting change. I wish you peace in Florida. Terrell Marcus. I mailed it the next day. And then, I let it go. The neighborhood changed. In Karen's absence, the HOA elected Mrs. Patel to fill the board vacancy. Her first motion? A community-wide welcome initiative. No more silent fences, she said. No more unspoken tests of who fits in. New families began moving in. A young couple with twins. A Vietnamese-American physician. A retired artist from New York. We hosted cookouts. Shared recipes. Told stories. One night, Amara and I stood on our back deck, drinks in hand, watching children chase fireflies across our lawn. This is what it should have been like from the beginning, I said. She nodded. But maybe it's only possible now, because of what we went through. I looked around. Neighbors laughing. Light spilling from kitchen windows. No tension in the air, no invisible walls. Just, community. And then came the email. From a young black couple in Seattle. We read your story, it said. We installed a camera on our porch. Caught our neighbor tossing our mail. We showed the footage to the postal inspector. She hasn't touched our mailbox since. Your courage gave us courage. I read it aloud to Amara. You've become an accidental activist, she said, smiling. I chuckled. I just wanted to live in peace. But you also reminded people what they deserve, she added. To be safe. To be seen. Weeks later, I found myself at my desk, typing. Chapter 1. I never thought I'd have to deal with the police in the first month of owning my dream home. The words poured out. Not just about mail. But about belonging. About who gets to feel at home in America, and who's told, silently or not, that they don't. Spring turned into summer on Sycamore Lane, and life flourished in ways I never anticipated. The garden out front was thriving, rows of green climbing into bursts of red, yellow, and purple. Amara called it our healing plot. I liked that. It felt like something beautiful was growing not just in the dirt, but in the bones of this neighborhood. Without Karen's shadow looming over us, the community seemed to breathe differently. Conversations at the mailbox lingered longer. Children played more freely. Neighbors organized spontaneous potlucks, and no one needed a permission slip from the HOA to gather. The HOA itself had transformed. Mrs. Patel, now acting president, worked with others to rewrite the bylaws, adding anti-discrimination clauses, transparency protocols, and a community welcome pledge. What had once been a tool of exclusion had become a scaffold for belonging. In mid-June, Mrs. Henderson knocked on our door. She was holding a mason jar of lemonade and a clipboard. "I'm recruiting for something," she said. I raised an eyebrow. "Is it a trap?" She laughed. "The opposite. It's the first ever Sycamore Community Garden Committee. I want you on it." "You had me at garden." Amara signed us both up without hesitation. We were placed in charge of designing a small pollinator path and helping organize a summer planting fair. Each Saturday morning, we met with neighbors and got our hands dirty together. It was healing in ways I hadn't expected. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just simple gestures, smiles, laughter. And it stitched the street together with more strength than any HOA mandate ever had. In early July, the Johnsons moved in. She was a pediatrician. He was a stay-at-home dad. Their 4-year-old twin daughters had curls like springs and curiosity like lightning. When Mrs. Patel proposed a welcome dinner, half the street volunteered dishes. Amara and I hosted it on our back deck. The Johnsons were nervous at first. I saw it in their shoulders, in the way they hesitated before accepting the invitation. I understood that feeling. But by the end of the night, their girls were asleep on a pile of throw pillows while the adults drank wine and traded bad HOA stories. "We weren't sure about moving to the suburbs," Dr. Johnson confessed as she sipped from a stemless glass. "Our last neighborhood was less welcoming." I nodded. "This one wasn't always like this. But it's becoming something new." She smiled. "I think we picked the right street." One afternoon, a week later, I received a call from Inspector Ramirez. "Terrell," she said, "I thought you'd want to know, Karen's probation is officially being served in Florida now. She completed her court-mandated diversity education, and her counselor says she's been cooperative." "Okay," I said, not sure what emotion I was supposed to have. "We also wrapped our internal audit," she continued. "Thanks to your case, we've launched a broader inquiry into male-related profiling. And the USPS is developing a new training protocol for inspectors. It's being named the Marcus Initiative." I went quiet. "You still there?" "Yeah," I said softly. "Just surprised." "You shouldn't be. You changed the system." A few days later, the Richmond Times-Dispatch published a feature called "The Man Who Planted Justice on Sycamore Lane." The journalist had interviewed me, Amara, Mrs. Patel, and even Mrs. Henderson. The piece told the story not just of a theft, but of a turning point. It went viral. For a while, I was inundated with interview requests, podcast invitations, community forum panels. I declined most of them. Not because I didn't care, but because my voice had already done what it needed to do. The change wasn't in the spotlight. It was in the soil. By August, I'd finished the first full draft of the memoir. Amara read it in 3 sittings. "You don't just tell the story," she said. "You show the struggle behind the silence. And the beauty of what came after." Publishers were interested. 3, to be exact. All wanted sample chapters. I sent them the first 4 and tried not to check my email every 5 minutes. Summer faded into early fall, and the annual block party arrived. But this year, it wasn't stiff or formal. There were bouncy castles, Caribbean food trucks, lanterns hung across driveways. Music spilled from speakers. Teenagers played cornhole next to retirees comparing peach cobbler recipes. Mrs. Henderson raised a glass in the middle of the evening. To Terrell and Amara, she said. For reminding us what a neighborhood can be. And for choosing to stay. There was clapping. A few cheers. Someone called out, to the garden that bloomed after the storm. I laughed. But it hit deep. That night, as Amara and I cleaned up folding chairs and paper plates, I looked out over our yard. Lights twinkled. Laughter still echoed faintly. And something settled in me. Peace. Not because everything was fixed. Not because prejudice had vanished. But because we'd made our space. And filled it with care. I thought back to the first day I saw Karen behind her curtain. That look of suspicion. That cold silence. And I thought about what had risen up to replace it. Warmth, welcome, resilience. That's when I knew the roots had taken hold. Not just in our garden. But in our street. Our hearts. Our future. By the time the leaves began to shift into their burnished reds and oranges, I'd stopped checking the news. The whirlwind of media coverage surrounding the case, the feature articles, the speaking invitations, it had all settled like dust on the windowsill. I wasn't hiding. I was grounding. Each morning, I laced up my running shoes and jogged past the yards that now felt less like borderlines and more like open palms. Kids waved. Dogs barked. The twin girls from the Johnsons darted past with sidewalk chalk and butterfly nets. Sycamore Lane had learned how to exhale. And so had I. One evening, while Amara stirred lentil stew in the kitchen, my phone vibrated on the counter. It was a local number I didn't recognize. Terrell Marcus, the voice asked. Yes. This is Angela Marsh from Riverstone Public Library. We're hosting a community dialogue series on neighborhood equity, and we'd love to have you as our closing speaker. I paused. I'm not an expert, I replied honestly. You're more than that, she said. You lived it. And you stayed. That got me. I agreed. The event took place in a warmly lit conference room, shelves lined with novels and civic histories. I wore a button-down and brought nothing but a few bullet points. What surprised me most wasn't the turnout, it was the questions. Not about the scandal, not even about Karen. They asked, how do you rebuild trust on your block? What do you do when your welcome isn't reciprocated? How do you forgive a place that wronged you? I spoke plainly. You don't wait for permission to belong, I told them. You plant your feet. And sometimes, when people see that you're not going anywhere, they start to meet you halfway. After the talk, a young couple approached me. The man, tall and lanky with soft eyes. The woman, visibly pregnant. We're moving into Sycamore next month, she said. We just wanted to say thank you, for making it a place we don't have to fear. Amara would later call that moment the real award. I agreed. Fall deepened. I received an advance contract from one of the publishers. The title, Open Mail, a memoir of belonging. The cover featured an abstract illustration of a mailbox rooted in soil, flowers blooming from its post. I approved it with a single note, make the blooms wild, not neat. That's how real gardens grow. Mrs. Patel arranged a launch event at the community center. There was cider, spiced donuts, and a stack of books. My neighbors filled the room. Even the Guptas drove in from another town to be there. Mrs. Henderson took the mic briefly and said, I used to sit in judgment from my window too. Just not as loudly. Terrell, you didn't just change the policy. You changed the culture. I didn't know what to say except thank you. That night, I found a small envelope tucked inside one of the books I'd signed. No return address. It held a photo. Karen. Standing with her sister in front of a modest house in Florida. No note. Just the image. I stared at it for a while. Not angry. Not afraid. Just curious. Her hair was grayer. Her smile tight. I showed it to Amara. "You think she's trying to say something?" she asked. "Maybe. Or maybe she's just reminding me she exists." "And what do you feel?" I thought about it. I feel like she's no longer the main character in my story. That's enough. I tucked the photo into the back of my desk drawer and returned to the party. Thanksgiving came. This year, we hosted. The table extended across both rooms. The Patels brought biryani. The Hendersons brought cornbread. The Johnsons brought sweet potato pie. There was no main dish, just contributions, offered with love and devoured in laughter. Mrs. Patel stood before dessert and lifted a glass. "To the Marcus household," she said. "For proving that change isn't just about tearing something down, but about building something better in its place." I looked around the room, at the families, the kids playing under the table, the laughter bouncing off our walls. This was it. This was the legacy. Not a story about mail. But a story about claiming space, standing ground, and daring to build warmth where cold once reigned. The first anniversary came quietly. No news vans. No press calls. No angry letters slid under my door. Just an early May morning with sunshine slanting over Sycamore Lane and the sound of Amara humming in the kitchen as she watered her herb wall. "Exactly 1 year ago today," she said, handing me a mug of coffee. "You watched Karen take your mail." I nodded, watching the steam curl. And everything changed. But it didn't feel like an anniversary of loss. It felt like a planting season. The street had bloomed. The pollinator garden out by the mailbox overflowed with lavender and salvia. The HOA bulletin board no longer bore complaints about unauthorized lawn ornaments. Instead, it featured photos from the kids' science fair, community potluck invites, and composting tips. Mrs. Henderson had taken up bread making and delivered a loaf each Sunday, still warm and wrapped in linen. The Johnson twins rang the doorbell almost daily to show off something new: leaf rubbings, wildflower bracelets, or very serious scribbled lists of the neighborhood's bird species. Sycamore Lane wasn't perfect. But it was honest. Open. And I had changed too. The memoir was weeks away from print. I'd reviewed final galleys, made a few adjustments to the epilogue, and added a new author's note: "This is not a story about villains. It's a story about what grows when we stay rooted in truth, even when the soil has been poisoned before." Publishers scheduled a regional tour. Just 6 cities. Enough to honor the story without turning it into a spectacle. I was nervous, but Amara, ever my compass, reminded me why I wrote it to begin with. "For every person who's had to pretend they belonged until they were tolerated," she said, "this is for them." One night, while preparing for the first reading event, I came across a draft email I'd never sent. It was to Karen. I'd started it during the early days of her incarceration, sometime after she wrote to me from Alderson. The tone was measured, but raw: "You violated my space. Not just the mailbox, but my morning coffee, my trust in my neighbors, the way I answer the door. I'm healing. But you need to understand the cost." I had never clicked send. Reading it now, I felt no need to. The words were mine, but they had served their purpose. I closed the draft and moved it to a folder labeled Legacy. At the library reading, a woman in her 60s approached me. She had silver hair, a navy blazer, and eyes that held something complicated. "My name's Lillian," she said. "I grew up in a neighborhood where people like you weren't allowed to own property. We weren't told that, just discouraged. Quietly. Repeatedly. She looked down at her signed copy of my book. I wish someone like you had been there then. I didn't know what to say. So I just placed a hand over hers. And that was enough. Weeks passed. Summer took root. Amara and I hosted another community cookout, this time with live music, a bounce house, and a table covered in free books from my tour leftovers. A teenage neighbor played acoustic guitar. Someone's uncle DJ'd from a portable speaker. Kids chalked the sidewalk with messages like "Welcome home" and "Kind neighbors only." That night, as fireflies lit the hedges, Amara turned to me. "Have you realized?" she asked. "Realized what?" "You don't flinch at the sound of footsteps on the porch anymore." She was right. We sat on the back deck long after everyone had gone. The garden was blooming wildly again, just as I'd asked the book designer to depict. "Do you miss anything about before?" she asked, head resting on my shoulder. I thought for a moment. "No," I said. "Before was quiet, but it wasn't peaceful." She nodded. "After all this, what would you tell your past self? The one watching Karen that first day?" I smiled. "I'd say, don't walk away. Stand your ground. What starts with a mailbox might just end with a movement." We toasted that with lemonade. To the roots we'd planted. To the mail we now opened freely. To the street that chose growth over silence. And to whatever came next. By mid-July, the neighborhood had begun to live not just in recovery, but in rhythm. The hum of lawnmowers, the pop of sprinklers, the sound of kids' laughter bouncing between driveways. It all settled into a kind of harmony. One morning, Amara found me on the porch, surrounded by unopened mail. "Fan letters?" she asked with a teasing smirk. "Mostly," I replied, holding up a stack bound by a rubber band. "Some are notes. Some are stories. And some are confessions." She raised an eyebrow. "They're from people," I explained, "who've lived through something similar but never said a word until now. I started reading them at night. A few each evening." Amara would light a candle. We'd sit on the porch swing. I'd read aloud, stopping only when the words hit too deep. One woman from Alabama wrote, "My neighbor asked the postman to reroute my packages because she said my foreign-sounding last name made her nervous." A man from Wisconsin, "Your story helped me confront my HOA president, who always questioned why I had so many guests who didn't look like they belonged." A retired teacher from Arizona. "My husband told me not to stir trouble. But when I saw Karen on the news, I realized I'd been Karen once, too. That last one stuck with me." "People are evolving," I told Amara. "Or finally telling the truth," she added. The mail became a mirror. A reflection of how ordinary cruelty could hide under civility. But also, how courage could rise from small, quiet places. One envelope arrived from a youth correctional facility in Ohio. It was a letter from a 17-year-old named Marcus G. No relation. He'd read about my story online. "I made mistakes. Stupid ones. But reading your story made me think, maybe I'm not broken. Just growing. Thank you for being someone who didn't give up." Amara cried reading that one. We printed it out, framed it, and placed it above the desk in our shared office. "Proof," she said. "That words plant seeds too." By August, the Marcus Initiative, a community awareness partnership inspired by our case, was officially rolled out across 6 states. Local libraries hosted forums. Mail carriers were issued new training materials. Neighborhood welcome kits now included guides on respectful engagement, courtesy of the HOA Diversity Alliance. Mrs. Patel even spearheaded a grant application for Sycamore Lane to become a national pilot site for equity-positive development. I didn't know such a title existed. But it fit. One Saturday, Amara and I took a walk with no destination. Just the two of us, hand in hand, along the sidewalks of Sycamore Lane. We passed kids riding bikes. Teens sharing earbuds. Elderly neighbors tending flower beds. No one stared. No one whispered. No one checked their watches as we strolled by. We were not new here anymore. We were not intruders. We were home. That evening, as we tidied up after dinner, Amara leaned against the counter and asked, "Do you think Karen ever reads the stories? Sees the changes?" I looked out the window. "I think she's watching," I said. "Maybe not literally. But she knows. And that's enough." Before bed, I opened one final letter. It was unsigned. But it said only this: when we let strangers become neighbors, and neighbors become family, we become unbreakable. Thank you for reminding us. I placed it in the drawer with the others. Then I turned out the light. The final stretch of summer arrived not with a bang, but with the hush of a community at peace. By mid-September, the evenings cooled. Kids returned to school. The garden yielded its last tomatoes. And Sycamore Lane shimmered under golden light as if exhaling a quiet blessing. Amara began drafting an op-ed for a legal publication on structural bias and residential gatekeeping. I, meanwhile, started sketching the framework for a children's book. One about a boy who plants a mailbox in a barren field, and over time, it blossoms into a neighborhood. It was a metaphor. But also, it wasn't. We began hosting quiet Sundays. Just a few neighbors. Tea. Jazz records. No big banners. No agenda. Just the kind of peace that blooms when no one has to justify their presence. Mrs. Patel called them porch light evenings. Because the porch light stays on, she said, for whoever needs to find their way. And people came. Some old. Some new. Some hesitant. Some wide open. But they came. One evening, a young woman showed up holding a pie and a nervous smile. "I just moved into the unit Karen used to own," she said. "Someone told me this was the house that changed everything." I almost corrected her. But Amara stepped forward instead. "This isn't the house," she said, gesturing gently around the group. "This is." In the quiet that followed, I thought of my parents, still calling every week from Chicago, asking for garden updates and book reviews. I thought of Marcus G., in Ohio. Of Lillian at the library. Of the kids whose chalk drawing still ghosted the sidewalk. I thought of Karen. And I hoped, truly, that her silence was the sound of transformation, not retreat. One morning, just before the first frost, I walked outside to retrieve the mail. Inside were 3 letters, a seed packet, and a handmade postcard that read, "Sycamore is everywhere now. Thank you for leaving the light on." I looked back at our porch. Amara stood there, coffee in hand, bathed in morning gold. And I knew we weren't just living in a neighborhood anymore. We were living in the story we wrote. Together. In a world where silence often shields injustice and politeness can mask prejudice, this story reminds us of the profound power of standing firm. With dignity, not vengeance. Terrell's journey isn't just about mail theft. It's about the theft of safety, trust, and quiet dignity, and the resilience it takes to reclaim them without becoming bitter. We learn that justice isn't always loud, sometimes it's a quiet seed planted in a hostile garden, watered by truth and nurtured by community. Over time, even the most poisoned soil can bear fruit when someone dares to stay, speak, and rebuild. Through each chapter, we witness how courage, compassion, and consistency reshape not just a street, but the very culture of belonging. It teaches us that healing isn't just personal, it's collective. That neighbors become family not through forced smiles, but through shared space, honest reckoning, and porch lights left on for those still finding their way. The story calls on each of us, especially adults who've weathered time's storms, to examine the subtle biases we've tolerated, the silent nods we've given to unfair systems, and the chances we still have to make things right. As we age, our legacy isn't measured only in achievements, but in the warmth we leave behind, the barriers we help dismantle, and the invitations we extend to those once kept out. Let this story be a reminder: transformation doesn't need permission. It begins when ordinary people choose to do the extraordinary: stay, listen, forgive, and grow. Backhand index pointing right. If this story moved you, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and ring the bell to support more stories like this. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? We'd love to know how far this message of hope and healing has traveled.